there comes a strange moment in life that many people never expect. Your body becomes slower, but your mind becomes louder. The room is quiet, yet inside your head, old conversations replay like ghosts. Regrets you thought were buried begin to rise again. Faces from the past return without warning. The future feels uncertain. The fear of illness grows. The fear of being forgotten grows. Even the smallest silence can suddenly feel heavy. And this is where suffering quietly begins. Because in old age, the real battle is not always with the body. It is with the mind. Buddhist wisdom teaches something most people discover too late. An uncontrolled mind can turn even a peaceful home into a prison, while a trained mind can create peace even in pain. Tonight, you will discover the timeless Buddhist teachings that help you control the mind in old age, release fear, and find the kind of inner peace that does not depend on youth, health, or the approval of others. But before we begin, tell me in the comments, from where are you watching, and what time is it in your city right now? Lesson 1. Your mind is not you. One of the greatest misunderstandings people carry into old age is this quiet belief that every thought in their mind is who they are. A painful memory appears, and they think, this is me. Fear about sickness appears, and they think, this is my reality. A regret from 30 years ago returns in the silence of the night, and they think, I am still trapped in this. But Buddhist wisdom begins by breaking this illusion. The Buddha taught that the mind is active, restless, constantly changing, like wind moving across water. Thoughts appear, emotions rise, memories return, fear speaks, but none of these are your permanent identity. This matters deeply in old age, because when the body becomes quieter, the mind often becomes noisier. In youth, life distracts you. Work keeps you moving. Responsibilities pull your attention outward. Family, ambition, survival, routine. These things keep the mind occupied. But later in life, when the pace slows, the hidden contents of the mind begin to surface. Old wounds, unspoken pain, regrets, fear of death, fear of loneliness, fear that life moved too quickly, fear that some dreams will never happen. And if you believe every thought that enters your mind, suffering becomes endless. Imagine sitting alone in the evening. A memory suddenly returns. A mistake you made decades ago, something you said, someone you hurt, someone who hurt you, and your mind whispers, you failed. You wasted your life. It is too late now. Most people do not question that voice. They accept it as truth. But Buddhist wisdom asks something radical. Who is the one hearing the thought? If you can observe the thought, then you are not the thought. This changes everything, because now the mind becomes something you can witness, not something that controls you. Think of the sky. Storms pass through it. Dark clouds gather. Thunder appears. Rain falls. But the sky itself remains untouched. Your awareness is the sky. Your thoughts are only passing weather. Old age becomes painful when people mistake temporary mental weather for permanent truth. A fearful thought says, I will become helpless. A lonely thought says, no one cares about me. A regretful thought says, my life was meaningless. But thoughts are not facts. They are movements of the restless mind. And a restless mind, left untrained, becomes a storyteller that creates suffering from shadows. This is why many elderly people suffer not only from physical pain, but from mental stories repeated thousands of times. The body may be sitting safely in a chair, but the mind may be fighting wars from 40 years ago. The body may be resting at home, but the mind may be imagining future disasters that have not happened. This is mental imprisonment, and Buddhist wisdom offers the first key. Observe. Do not immediately obey. The next time fear appears, do not say, I am afraid. Say, fear is present. The next time regret appears, do not say, I am broken. Say, regret is visiting. This small shift creates enormous freedom, because now you stop becoming every emotion that enters your mind. You become the watcher, and the watcher has power. An elderly monk was once asked how he remained peaceful despite pain, loss, and aging. He smiled and said, "I learned to sit beside my thoughts instead of becoming them." That is profound wisdom, because suffering grows when identification grows. Freedom begins when observation begins. Old age does not have to become a prison built by thought, but it will if you never learn that your mind speaks in many voices and not all of them deserve your trust. The first step to controlling the mind in old age is understanding this simple but life-changing truth. You are not every thought that enters your head, and once that truth becomes real, the chains begin to loosen. Lesson 2. Let go of the weight of the past. Once a person begins to understand that thoughts are not the self, another hidden battle in old age reveals itself with painful clarity. It is the battle with the past. For many elderly people, the past does not stay behind them. It sits beside them. At the dinner table, in the silence before sleep, in the early hours of the morning, when the world is still and the mind becomes loud, a single memory can return with shocking force. A face not seen in decades, a conversation that ended badly, a dream that was never fulfilled, a child who moved far away, a love that ended, a betrayal that still burns quietly beneath the surface, a mistake made in anger, a decision that changed the course of life forever. And suddenly, the body is here in the present, but the mind is living 30 years ago. This is one of the cruelest forms of suffering, because the past is untouchable. No matter how many nights you replay it, no matter how many times you imagine a different ending, no matter how perfectly you rewrite the conversation in your mind, the past remains exactly where it is. And yet millions of people spend their old age trying to mentally negotiate with closed doors. Buddhist wisdom speaks directly to this suffering. Attachment is not only attachment to people, possessions, youth, or pleasure. It is also attachment to memory. This surprises many people, because they assume attachment only means clinging to what they love. But sometimes the strongest attachment is to pain, to guilt, to resentment, to unfinished emotional stories. The mind says, if I think about it long enough, maybe I will finally find peace. But often the opposite happens. The more you replay the wound, the deeper the wound becomes. Imagine carrying a heavy stone every single day for 40 years. At first it feels unbearable. Later it becomes familiar. Then strangely, it becomes part of your identity. You no longer ask whether you should put it down. You simply assume carrying pain is who you are. This is what many elderly people do with emotional suffering. They carry old arguments, old disappointments, old betrayals, old regrets, old self-hatred, and because they carried them for so long, they mistake the burden for themselves. But Buddhist wisdom asks a difficult question. Why continue carrying what has already happened? Not because the pain was not real, not because the loss was not devastating, not because the betrayal did not wound you deeply, but because carrying it now changes nothing except your present suffering. There is a quiet tragedy in old age when a person survives every storm life gave them, only to keep reopening those storms inside their own mind. Think of how strange this is. Life may have already moved on. The people involved may be gone. The event may belong to another version of reality, yet inside the mind, the suffering remains alive because attention keeps feeding it. Buddhist teaching reminds us that clinging is suffering, and nowhere is this clearer than in attachment to the past. A man may spend 20 years regretting words he spoke in anger to his brother. A woman may spend decades grieving the life she imagined but never lived. Another person may endlessly replay financial mistakes, broken relationships, parenting regrets, lost opportunities, and slowly the present moment disappears beneath the weight of memory. But here is the deeper truth. The past is not hurting you in this exact moment. Your relationship with the past is. That distinction changes everything. Because if the suffering comes from the relationship, then the relationship can change. Many people believe letting go means saying the pain never mattered. Buddhist wisdom does not teach denial, it teaches release. There is a difference. Denial says, nothing happened. Release says, something happened, but I will not allow it to own the rest of my life. This is strength. This is mental discipline. This is freedom. Picture an elderly monk sitting near a quiet mountain temple. Someone asks him, "Do painful memories still visit you?" He smiles gently and says, "Yes, but I no longer invite them to stay for tea." What beautiful wisdom! Because memories may return, that is natural. The mind remembers. That is what minds do. But suffering begins when you build a home for every painful thought. When regret knocks, you do not need to hand it the keys. When guilt appears, you do not need to sit beneath it for hours. When old resentment returns, you do not need to rehearse the same emotional play again. Observe it, acknowledge it, then let it pass. Old age should be a season of wisdom, but many people unknowingly turn it into a museum of emotional pain, walking room to room, touching every wound, revisiting every sorrow, polishing every regret, until suffering becomes a daily ritual. Buddhist wisdom offers another path. Close the museum, step outside, breathe in the present. The sky above you is not the sky from 40 years ago. This breath is not old. This moment is not broken. Life is still here. Peace is still possible. But not if your hands remain chained to what cannot be changed. The mind becomes controllable the moment you stop feeding ghosts from the past. Because the truth is simple, though painful. You cannot relive yesterday, but you can lose today by trying. And that is a price far too high to pay. Lesson 3. Make peace with aging, or your mind will turn it into fear. After learning to loosen the grip of the past, another deeper battle begins to reveal itself in old age. And for many people, this battle is even more frightening, because it is not about what already happened. It is about what is happening right now, inside the body, inside time itself, inside the quiet realization that life is changing, whether the mind accepts it or not. This is the fear of aging, and Buddhist wisdom teaches something most people resist for far too long. Suffering does not come from aging itself nearly as much as it comes from fighting what aging means. A person looks in the mirror and sees a face they no longer recognize. The skin has changed, the energy has changed. The body does not obey the way it once did. Stairs feel different, sleep feels different, memory feels different. The world itself feels faster, while the body feels slower. And slowly a silent panic begins to grow. Not always loudly, sometimes very quietly, quiet enough that no one around notices. But inside, the mind whispers terrifying questions. Am I becoming weak? Am I becoming irrelevant? Will people still need me? What if sickness comes? What if dependence comes? What if loneliness comes? What if death is closer than I want to admit? And this is where the uncontrolled mind becomes dangerous. Because the mind rarely presents fear as fear. It presents fear as certainty. It does not say, perhaps difficult things may happen. It says everything is going downhill. It does not say your body is changing naturally. It says you are losing everything. It does not say life has seasons. It says your best days are over. And if this voice goes unchallenged, old age becomes mentally unbearable. But Buddhist wisdom begins with a hard truth that can also become profound freedom. Everything changes. Everything. Youth changes. Health changes. Relationships change. Circumstances change. Identity changes. The body changes. The world changes. This is not a punishment. This is reality. One of the deepest causes of suffering is not change itself, but the refusal to accept change. Imagine holding ice tightly in your hand while begging it not to melt. The tighter you grip, the more distress you create. Not because melting is cruel, but because your expectation is impossible. This is what many people do with youth. They grip. They compare themselves to who they once were. They mentally replay stronger years, sharper years, more attractive years, more energetic years, years when they felt important, needed, desired, capable. And because the mind worships what has passed, the present begins to feel like loss. But Buddhist wisdom does not teach worship of youth. It teaches understanding of impermanence. Impermanence is not depressing. It is liberating, because once you deeply understand that change is the nature of life, you stop being shocked by it. A leaf falls from a tree. You do not call it tragedy. The moon changes shape. You do not call it failure. The seasons shift. You do not call it injustice. So why does the human mind treat aging as personal betrayal? Because the ego wants permanence. The ego wants control. The ego wants the body to obey forever. The ego wants time to ask permission before moving forward. But life does not negotiate, and peace begins when resistance ends. An elderly person may suffer more from fear of illness than from illness itself, more from imagined loneliness than actual solitude, more from anticipation of death than present reality. This is how the mind creates prisons from possibilities. Buddhist teaching invites us to return to what is real, right now, not imagined futures, not exaggerated fears, not stories written by anxiety. Reality. This breath, this chair, this moment, this heartbeat, this patch of sunlight on the floor, this tea in your hand, this bird outside the window. The mind suffers when it abandons the present and begins living inside imagined catastrophe. And old age makes this temptation stronger, because uncertainty becomes more visible. But uncertainty was always there. Youth simply distracted you from seeing it. A young person believes they control tomorrow. An older person realizes tomorrow was never guaranteed. That realization can create panic or wisdom. The difference depends on the mind. A monk once watched an elderly man crying near a temple garden. When asked why, the man said, "I am afraid of becoming less." The monk gently asked, "Less than what?" The man had no answer. Because much of our fear is built on comparison. Less strength than before, less beauty than before, less memory than before, less energy than before. But Buddhist wisdom asks a different question. What if aging is not becoming less? What if it is becoming different? What if wisdom replaces speed? Stillness replaces noise? Perspective replaces ambition? Depth replaces performance? What if aging is not theft, but transformation? The uncontrolled mind sees wrinkles and says, "Decline." The trained mind sees them and says, "Evidence that I have lived." The uncontrolled mind sees slower movement and says, "Weakness." The trained mind says, "A new rhythm." The uncontrolled mind sees uncertainty and says, "Danger." The trained mind says, "Life has always been uncertain." This shift is not denial, it is discipline, and discipline changes suffering. Another hidden poison in old age is the belief that worth is tied to usefulness. If I no longer work, am I valuable? If fewer people call, do I matter? If my role changes, who am I? These questions torture many aging minds, but Buddhist wisdom separates worth from function. A flower does not need productivity to be beautiful. A mountain does not need applause to matter. The moon does not ask whether it is still relevant. Existence itself has dignity, and so do you. An uncontrolled mind attaches identity to performance. A trained mind learns to rest in being. This becomes essential in old age because life naturally strips away roles. Children grow, careers end, bodies slow, social circles change, and if identity depends only on external roles, suffering becomes intense. But if identity loosens from these attachments, peace becomes possible. And then comes the deepest fear many refuse to name: death, the shadow behind many anxieties, the silent fear behind many restless nights. Buddhist wisdom does not ask us to obsess over death, but neither does it ask us to pretend it does not exist. Avoided fear becomes larger, faced fear becomes clearer. The mind often turns death into horror because the unknown invites imagination, but fear of death often steals more life than death itself. How tragic to spend your remaining years mentally dying thousands of times before life has even ended. This is not wisdom. This is mental self-torment. The purpose of contemplating impermanence is not despair. It is awakening. If life changes, appreciate this moment. If time moves, live consciously. If nothing is permanent, love wisely. If tomorrow is uncertain, be present today. This transforms fear into clarity. Old age becomes terrifying only when the mind demands guarantees life never promised. But peace becomes possible when the mind learns to walk beside uncertainty without collapsing beneath it. The truth is simple. Aging is not your enemy. Resistance is, and the moment you stop fighting reality, your mind becomes quieter. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your war with life begins to end. Lesson 4. Guard your mind from loneliness before loneliness rewrites your soul. For many people, the fear of aging is not truly about wrinkles, slower movement, weaker memory, or even illness. Beneath all of those fears lies something quieter and, for many, far more painful. It is the fear of being alone, not simply physically alone, but emotionally unseen, spiritually disconnected, mentally abandoned inside your own thoughts. And this is where the uncontrolled mind becomes especially dangerous, because loneliness is one of the most powerful mirrors the human mind will ever face. When there is noise, activity, conversation, work, obligations, errands, family movement, television, routines, social expectations, and constant distraction, the mind has many places to hide. But when life slows down, when children build their own lives, when loved ones pass away, when calls become fewer, when rooms grow quieter, when evenings stretch longer than they once did, the mind suddenly finds itself face to face with itself. For some people, this becomes peace. For others, it becomes torment. The difference is not the room. The difference is the mind inside the room. This is one of the deepest Buddhist truths, and one many people only begin to understand very late in life. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. An uncontrolled mind confuses them. A trained mind knows the difference. Loneliness says, I am empty because no one is here. Solitude says, I am present with myself. Loneliness says, my worth depends on being wanted. Solitude says, my existence does not require an audience. Loneliness says, silence means abandonment. Solitude says, silence can be a doorway. This distinction can completely change old age. Because if a person never learns to be peacefully present with themselves, aging can feel emotionally unbearable. Every quiet evening becomes punishment. Every empty chair becomes accusation. Every missed call becomes proof of unworthiness. Every holiday becomes pain. Every silence becomes confirmation of abandonment. And slowly the mind begins writing cruel stories. No one needs me anymore. I have become forgettable. My life has become small. I am just waiting. This is how suffering deepens. Not because silence is cruel, but because the mind interprets silence through fear. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often grows less from circumstances than from the meanings we attach to them. Two people may sit alone in identical rooms. One experiences peace. The other experiences despair. The room is not the cause. The mind is. This can feel difficult to accept because loneliness is real. Human connection matters. Loss matters. Grief matters. Companionship matters. No wise teaching asks us to pretend otherwise. But Buddhist wisdom asks a deeper question. When external companionship is reduced, what kind of relationship remains between you and your own mind? For many, this is an uncomfortable question, because some people have spent their entire lives avoiding themselves. Noise helped, work helped, responsibilities helped, social identity helped, being needed helped, being busy helped. But when those layers fall away, the raw relationship with self becomes visible. And if that relationship was neglected for decades, loneliness can feel overwhelming. Imagine meeting a stranger who follows you everywhere, comments on everything, criticizes your memories, predicts dark futures, reminds you of regrets, compares you to others, and never stops speaking. You would call that exhausting. Yet this is how many people live with their own mind. Then when external company fades, they are left alone with the harshest companion they have ever known. No wonder silence feels frightening. An elderly monk was once asked whether he ever felt lonely living in quiet simplicity. He answered, Loneliness comes when I demand company from the world. Peace comes when I become good company for myself. That is extraordinary wisdom, because one of the most overlooked forms of mental training is learning how to become internally hospitable. Can you sit with yourself without immediately reaching for pain? Can you experience silence without filling it with fear? Can you remember the past without drowning in it? Can you exist without needing constant proof that you matter? These are not small questions. They shape the emotional quality of old age. Many people believe loneliness means other people failed them. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes relationships genuinely disappear. Sometimes loss is devastating. Sometimes neglect is painful. But even then, the mind still determines whether solitude becomes healing or destructive. Because loneliness often says less about physical isolation than about emotional disconnection from self. Think carefully about this. A person may be surrounded by family and still feel deeply lonely. Another may live alone and feel profoundly at peace. Why? Because loneliness is not simply about who is present around you. It is about what is happening within you. This is why chasing constant distraction does not solve loneliness. Television may numb it temporarily. Scrolling may distract it briefly. Noise may cover it for an hour. But when the distractions end, the unresolved relationship with self remains. Buddhist practice does not merely distract the lonely mind. It transforms the relationship between awareness and inner experience. Breathing becomes companionship. Observation becomes grounding. Presence becomes refuge. Stillness becomes teacher. This does not happen overnight. A mind trained for decades in anxiety, dependency, comparison, and emotional hunger does not suddenly become peaceful because silence appears. Training takes patience, compassion, repetition, awareness. But it is possible, and this possibility changes everything. Another hidden poison in old age is emotional comparison. The mind says other people have grandchildren visiting. Other people seem surrounded by love. Other people appear happier. Comparison turns solitude into humiliation, but comparison is mental fiction. You are comparing your inner reality to someone else's visible moments. You do not know their suffering. You do not know their nights. You do not know their thoughts. And even if their life is different, comparison still solves nothing. It only feeds resentment. A trained mind refuses unnecessary comparison. It returns to direct experience. What is true right now? This breath, this moment, this awareness, this cup of tea, this window light, this heartbeat. Reality is often gentler than the stories the mind creates about it. Then there is grief. This must be spoken honestly. For some elderly people, loneliness is not imagination. It is loss. A spouse gone, friends gone, family far away, voices permanently absent. This pain is real. Buddhist wisdom does not mock grief. It honors impermanence. Love leaves traces. Loss hurts because love mattered. But even grief changes shape when the mind stops resisting what cannot be undone. Love does not disappear because form changes. Memory need not become suffering. Presence can coexist with sorrow. A peaceful mind does not mean never missing anyone. It means not turning missing into endless self-destruction. And perhaps the deepest transformation comes when solitude becomes sacred rather than threatening. What if quiet is not punishment? What if quiet is invitation? An invitation to notice breath, to notice light, to notice thought, to notice existence itself, to discover that beneath noise, beneath identity, beneath fear, something still remains. Awareness, stillness, presence, peace. Old age often removes many distractions, not to punish you, but to reveal what your relationship with mind has truly become. If the mind is chaotic, silence feels dangerous. If the mind is trained, silence becomes sanctuary. This is why guarding the mind from loneliness matters so deeply. Because loneliness, if left unchecked, does not merely create sadness. It rewrites identity. It teaches false stories. It convinces people they are abandoned, unnecessary, invisible, forgotten. But these are stories, not ultimate truth. Your worth is not measured by how many people knock on your door. Your dignity is not determined by how often your phone rings. Your value is not dependent on constant external validation. These are illusions of the restless mind. And when those illusions fall away, something beautiful becomes possible. Not isolation, not emotional numbness, but genuine inner companionship, the kind that cannot be taken by distance, time, changing circumstances, or the silence of the world. The mind becomes controllable when you stop begging silence to become noise, and instead learn to hear the wisdom inside the quiet. Lesson 5. Discipline the restless mind before it turns every day into suffering. By the time many people reach old age, they assume the mind is simply the way it is. If it worries, that is just personality. If it overthinks, that is just habit. If it creates fear, regret, imaginary disasters, endless mental arguments, restless nights, emotional exhaustion, and repeating loops of suffering, they quietly accept this as normal. But Buddhist wisdom refuses this assumption, because one of the most life-changing truths the Buddha's teachings point toward is this: an untrained mind behaves like wild weather, but a trained mind becomes a place of refuge. This is where many people misunderstand peace. They think peace comes when problems disappear, when the body stops hurting, when family becomes perfect, when loneliness vanishes, when uncertainty ends, when the future becomes safe. But life rarely offers those guarantees. So if peace depends entirely on external conditions, peace remains fragile. Buddhist wisdom teaches another path: train the mind itself, not because life becomes easy, but because an undisciplined mind can turn even ordinary moments into suffering. Look closely at how the restless mind behaves. It wakes up already worrying. It invents conversations before they happen. It replays conversations after they end. It predicts illness from small sensations. It imagines rejection from silence. It transforms uncertainty into catastrophe. It turns memory into guilt. It turns solitude into abandonment. It turns aging into doom. It creates stories so convincing that the body reacts as if the imagined danger were real: heart racing, tension rising, sleep disturbed, breath shortened, energy drained. And the tragedy is this: sometimes nothing dangerous is actually happening. The suffering is being generated internally. An elderly person may be sitting safely in a quiet room while their nervous system behaves as though war has begun. Why? Because the mind does not always distinguish between reality and repeatedly imagined threat. This is why discipline matters. Not punishment, not harsh suppression, not emotional denial. Discipline, the gentle but firm training of attention. Imagine a monkey leaping wildly from branch to branch, never still, grabbing everything, reacting to every movement, unable to settle for even a moment. This image appears often in Buddhist teaching because it mirrors the untrained human mind. One thought to another, one fear to another, one memory to another, one imagined future to another, one emotional trigger to another. Constant movement, constant reaction, constant exhaustion. Now imagine becoming old while that monkey remains completely undisciplined. The body slows, but the mind keeps jumping. That becomes torment. This is why mental discipline becomes even more essential later in life. Because the external world may naturally become quieter, but without training, the internal world becomes louder. Many people ask, how do I control my mind? The deeper answer is surprising. You do not control the mind through force. You train it through relationship. Try forcing the mind not to think. Immediately it rebels. Tell yourself not to worry. Worry becomes stronger. Command yourself to stop remembering. Memory becomes louder. Resistance often feeds the very thing you are fighting. So Buddhist wisdom offers another approach. Observe, redirect, return. Again and again. This sounds simple, but simple does not mean easy. Discipline is repetition. The same way physical muscles strengthen through repeated use, mental stability strengthens through repeated returning. Returning to breath, returning to present awareness, returning to direct experience instead of imagined stories, returning to what is happening instead of what might happen. This practice transforms the mind slowly, not dramatically. A person sits quietly. The mind wanders. They notice. They return. The mind wanders again. They return again. This happens 50 times, 100 times, 1,000 times over months and years. Some people think this means failure. It is actually training. Each return is strength. Each moment of noticing is awareness growing. Each interruption of unconscious mental spiraling is freedom being built. An old monk once said, "The goal is not to stop thoughts from arriving. The goal is to stop serving them tea every time they knock." That is profound, because suffering often comes not from thoughts appearing, but from the hospitality we offer them. A fearful thought arrives. Instead of noticing it, we decorate it, expand it, feed it, believe it, build stories around it. Hours disappear, mood collapses, energy drains, all because one passing thought was welcomed as absolute truth. Mental discipline changes this. A thought says, "Something is wrong." Awareness asks, "Is that true right now?" A thought says, "You are alone." Awareness asks, "Or am I simply experiencing quiet?" A thought says, "The future is dangerous." Awareness asks, "Or is uncertainty simply present?" A thought says, "You are becoming weak." Awareness asks, "Or is life changing form?" This questioning interrupts automatic suffering, and interruption creates space. Space changes everything, because in space, choice becomes possible. Without space, reaction rules. Another overlooked discipline is attention hygiene. Many elderly minds suffer because attention is constantly fed agitation, hours of alarming news, fearful conversations, repeated negativity, comparison, complaint, rumination. The mind becomes what it repeatedly consumes. If every day begins with fear, fear becomes familiar. If every day is filled with agitation, calm feels foreign. Buddhist wisdom recognizes this deeply. Attention is nourishment. What you repeatedly feed grows. If resentment is fed, resentment strengthens. If fear is fed, fear strengthens. If awareness is fed, awareness strengthens. If gratitude is fed, steadiness strengthens. So disciplining the mind also means protecting what enters it. Not every thought deserves attention. Not every conversation deserves emotional investment. Not every fear deserves rehearsal. Not every story deserves belief. This becomes an act of wisdom. Then comes emotional momentum. One thought becomes 10. 10 become 50. 50 become an emotional storm. The earlier awareness intervenes, the easier redirection becomes. A small spark is easier to manage than a wildfire. This is why awareness must become early. Notice the first anxious tightening. Notice the first catastrophic thought. Notice the first resentment replay. Notice the first comparison. Notice the first spiral. That moment is powerful, because before momentum builds, freedom is more accessible. An uncontrolled mind says, "I am already upset, so now I am trapped." A trained mind says, "I noticed early. I can return now." This changes emotional life dramatically, and discipline is not cold. This matters. Some people mistake discipline for emotional hardness, but Buddhist discipline includes compassion. When the mind wanders, you do not attack yourself. When anxiety appears, you do not shame yourself. When sadness returns, you do not declare failure. You notice gently. You return patiently. Harshness creates another layer of suffering. Compassion stabilizes training. Imagine teaching a frightened animal to trust stillness. You would not scream at it for trembling. Why scream at your own mind? The mind has learned certain habits through decades of conditioning: fear, comparison, overthinking, attachment, restlessness. Undoing these patterns requires patience. But patience is not passivity. Patience is disciplined kindness. And over time, something extraordinary begins to happen. The mind still produces thoughts, but fewer control you. Fear still appears, but does not dominate as easily. Regret still visits, but no longer lives in your home. Loneliness still arrives, but does not define your identity. Uncertainty remains, But panic lessens. Why? Because discipline has changed the relationship. The mind becomes less dictator, more weather, more movement, less master. And perhaps the greatest hidden tragedy is how many people spend their later years never learning this. They believe suffering is inevitable. They believe restlessness is fixed. They believe overthinking is identity. But Buddhist wisdom says otherwise. A mind can be trained at any age, at 60, at 70, at 80, even later. Awareness does not expire. Peace does not belong only to youth. Discipline is still available, right now. In this breath, in this moment of noticing, the uncontrolled mind turns ordinary days into private battlefields. The disciplined mind turns even imperfect days into practice. And slowly, almost quietly, suffering begins to lose its authority, because the mind that once dragged you everywhere has finally begun to learn how to sit still. Lesson 6. Release attachment before attachment turns old age into invisible suffering. By this stage, a deeper truth begins to emerge, one that many people resist more than almost anything else, because it touches the hidden roots beneath fear, loneliness, regret, restlessness, and the endless emotional storms of the mind. Buddhist wisdom returns to this truth again and again, because without understanding it, mental peace remains fragile, no matter how disciplined a person appears on the surface. That truth is attachment, not love, not care, not appreciation. Attachment, and many people confuse these things for an entire lifetime. They believe attachment is proof of love. They believe clinging is proof of loyalty. They believe emotional dependence is proof of meaning. They believe needing something desperately makes it valuable. But Buddhist wisdom sees more clearly. Attachment is not the same as connection. Attachment is the mind insisting that peace can only exist if reality behaves a certain way. And old age exposes this illusion with painful clarity, because life naturally begins removing things people once assumed would remain forever. Strength changes, appearance changes, independence changes, roles change, relationships change, social importance changes, routine changes, familiar environments change, possessions may be lost, friends may disappear, loved ones may die, children may move far away. The body itself no longer behaves as a reliable ally, and when the mind has built identity around attachment, every one of these changes feels like personal destruction. This is why two people can age under similar circumstances and experience entirely different emotional realities. One becomes bitter, frightened, emotionally shattered, constantly grieving what has changed. The other becomes softer, wiser, strangely peaceful even in uncertainty. What makes the difference? Often, attachment. The mind says, I must remain physically strong to have worth. Suffering begins. The mind says, my children must behave exactly as I imagined. Suffering begins. The mind says, people must remember me, call me, need me, appreciate me. Suffering begins. The mind says, my body must not weaken. Suffering begins. The mind says, life must unfold according to my emotional expectations. Suffering begins. Notice the pattern. The suffering is not born only from reality. It is born from demand, from insistence, from clinging, from arguing with the nature of life itself. Imagine holding sand tightly in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes. Now imagine gently holding it with an open hand. The relationship changes. This is the difference between attachment and wise connection. Attachment strangles. Presence allows. Attachment says, stay exactly as I need you to be. Wisdom says, I appreciate what is here while understanding change is inevitable. This becomes essential in old age, because attachment often becomes invisible. A person may not realize they are attached. They simply call it love, or concern, or responsibility, or memory. But if peace collapses every time reality shifts, attachment is likely involved. Take attachment to youth. Many elderly people suffer not only because the body changes, but because the mind remains emotionally attached to an old self-image. The face in memory, the speed in memory, the attractiveness in memory, the energy in memory, the identity built around capability, and when reality no longer matches that image, grief emerges, not because change is unnatural, but because attachment refuses to update, or attachment to control. This is one of the deepest mental traps. People spend decades managing responsibilities, making decisions, shaping environments, caring for others, influencing outcomes. Then life becomes less controllable. Health introduces unpredictability. Family choices move beyond your authority. Time behaves independently, and the mind panics, because attachment to control creates the illusion that peace requires command. But life has never fully obeyed anyone. Youth simply makes this easier to ignore. Buddhist wisdom does not teach helplessness. It teaches clarity. Act where action is possible. Release what cannot be commanded. Otherwise, the mind wages endless war against reality. Then there is attachment to identity. This can become especially painful in old age. Who am I if I am no longer the provider? Who am I if I am no longer needed in the same way? Who am I if my professional role ends? Who am I if family dynamics shift? Who am I if illness changes my capacities? These questions reveal how tightly many people attach identity to temporary roles. But roles are costumes life asks us to wear for a time. They are not permanent essence. A mountain remains a mountain whether clouds cover it or not. Your deeper worth does not disappear because certain roles change. But attachment makes role changes feel like personal extinction. Another painful attachment is to emotional expectation. This often remains hidden. A parent expects children to behave with certain gratitude. A spouse expects emotional closeness in a specific form. A person expects life to reward sacrifices in predictable ways. Reality often refuses these contracts. And when expectation hardens into attachment, disappointment becomes chronic suffering. Buddhist wisdom does not say never love. It says love without imprisoning your peace inside outcomes you cannot control. This is radical emotional freedom. Love deeply, care sincerely, serve compassionately, but do not build your entire inner stability on external obedience. Because people are impermanent, circumstances are impermanent, bodies are impermanent, time is impermanent. Another subtle attachment emerges in memory. Some people become attached, not only to painful pasts, but to beautiful pasts. This is less obvious but equally powerful. They replay better days, healthier days, busier homes, louder laughter, more meaningful routines. The mind idealizes what was, and the present begins to feel pale by comparison. This creates suffering, because attachment turns memory into emotional measurement. But memory is selective. It edits, it romanticizes, it simplifies. The past was never as perfect as nostalgia suggests. Attachment paints it that way. Then there is perhaps the deepest attachment of all, attachment to permanence itself. The unconscious belief that something, somewhere, should remain fixed, that loved ones should stay, that identity should remain stable, that the body should obey, that life should preserve what matters. But impermanence is not malfunction, it is structure. The refusal to understand this guarantees suffering. An elderly monk was asked what he lost by growing older. He answered, "Many things." Then he smiled and added, "Mostly the illusion that anything was mine forever." That is extraordinary wisdom, because much suffering comes from possessive thinking. My body, my family, my role, my plans, my future. But life allows relationship, not ownership. Everything is temporarily entrusted. Nothing is permanently guaranteed. This sounds severe until understood deeply. Then it becomes liberating, because if nothing can be permanently possessed, you stop demanding impossible security. You begin appreciating instead of clinging, receiving instead of gripping, participating instead of controlling. This changes emotional texture completely. Attachment also distorts grief. Grief itself is natural. Love makes loss painful. But attachment often turns grief into self-destruction by insisting reality should be otherwise forever. Wisdom allows sorrow without total collapse. This is not emotional coldness, it is maturity. A person can miss deeply without mentally dying every day. Another hidden form of attachment is to suffering itself. Yes, even suffering. Some people become attached to victim identity. Their pain becomes story. Their story becomes identity. Their identity becomes protection. To release pain feels strangely threatening because without it, who are they? Who are they? This is subtle but real. The mind can cling even to misery if misery feels familiar. Buddhist wisdom gently exposes this. You are not required to remain loyal to suffering simply because you have carried it for a long time. You may set it down. No betrayal is involved, only freedom. The final attachment many elderly minds wrestle with is fear of losing life itself. This is understandable, but Buddhist wisdom asks us to examine carefully whether fear protects life or merely poisons the life still available. How much life is lost by obsessing over loss? How much peace is sacrificed trying to secure the impossible? How many beautiful, ordinary moments disappear because the mind is busy clinging? A quiet afternoon, a warm drink, rain against a window, birdsong, a conversation, sunlight, breath, presence, all missed because the mind is busy demanding guarantees. Attachment steals current life in the name of preserving future certainty. But certainty was never truly available. Only this moment was. And perhaps this is the deepest freedom of all. When attachment loosens, life does not become empty. It becomes vivid because appreciation grows when possession ends. Peace grows when demand softens. Love grows when fear loosens its grip. Old age becomes lighter, not because change stops, but because the mind stops strangling reality. The uncontrollable mind clings to everything and suffers constantly. The trained mind learns to open its hand, and in that opening, something astonishing appears. Not emptiness, freedom. Lesson 7. Master the final battle. The mind that fears endings. After all the lessons of life, after the regrets, the attachments, the loneliness, the changes in the body, the slowing of time, the quiet evenings, the memories that return uninvited, and the long inner battles no one else ever fully sees, there remains one final confrontation that many people spend their entire lives trying not to name. It is the confrontation with endings, not just the ending of youth, not just the ending of certain relationships, not just the ending of old identities, but the deepest ending the human mind quietly circles around in fear. The ending of life itself. And here, more than anywhere else, the uncontrolled mind becomes both storyteller and torturer. Because the mind does not simply fear what is real. It invents horrors around what it cannot fully understand. It imagines helplessness, darkness, separation, loss, oblivion, abandonment, pain, unknown transitions, and then it replays these imagined endings again and again until the person begins suffering long before anything has actually happened. This is one of the cruelest tricks of the restless mind. It steals life by making you mentally rehearse losing it. A person may still be alive, breathing, capable of experiencing beauty, warmth, conversation, peace, and meaningful awareness. Yet internally they may already be living inside 1,000 imaginary endings. This is not wisdom. This is fear wearing the mask of preparation. Buddhist wisdom approaches this final battle with remarkable honesty. It does not ask you to deny impermanence. It does not ask you to pretend endings do not exist. It does not ask you to distract yourself endlessly until life quietly disappears. Instead, it invites a deeper courage to look directly at impermanence without becoming its prisoner. This sounds simple when spoken. In practice, it is one of the most difficult disciplines of the human mind because the ego wants continuation. The ego wants guarantees. The ego wants identity preserved exactly as it understands itself. The ego wants tomorrow promised, but life has never signed such agreements. Not for the young, not for the old, not for the wealthy, not for the healthy, not for anyone. The difference is that youth often creates the illusion of distance from endings. Old age removes some of that illusion, and for many, this feels terrifying. But Buddhist wisdom offers a radical shift. The problem is not that life ends. The problem is that the untrained mind demands permanence from what was never permanent. Look at nature. Leaves fall. Seasons shift. Flowers bloom and fade. Rain arrives and disappears. The moon changes shape endlessly. Morning becomes evening without apology. Nothing in nature behaves as though permanence were the rule. So why does the human mind act shocked by change? Because attachment builds fantasy. Fantasy says, I should remain. Reality says, all forms change. Fantasy says, this identity must continue unchanged. Reality says, identity itself is movement. Fantasy says, endings are unfair. Reality says, endings are woven into beginnings. This is not meant to create despair. It is meant to dissolve unnecessary resistance, because much fear comes not from endings themselves, but from the stories resistance creates. Imagine standing on a shoreline, terrified because waves keep disappearing. The fear comes from misunderstanding the nature of waves. Movement is their nature. Appearance and disappearance are inseparable. So too with life. One elderly monk was once asked whether he feared death. He sat quietly for a long moment, then said, I feared it most when I had not yet learned how to live this moment. What extraordinary wisdom, because fear of endings often grows strongest when attention abandons the present. The mind says, what if I lose everything? What if I suffer? What if I disappear? What if those I love are gone? What if I face it alone? Notice how every question pulls awareness away from reality and into imagined territory. And imagination, when governed by fear, becomes merciless. This is why many people suffer more from anticipated endings than actual circumstances. Buddhist practice repeatedly returns attention to what is real. This breath, this sensation, this sound, this light, this exact moment, because the mind cannot be peaceful while living entirely inside imagined futures. The future does not yet exist, but fear behaves as though it already owns you, and so the person lives in emotional captivity. This is one hidden tragedy of old age. Not aging itself, but mentally abandoning the life still here. How many beautiful moments are missed because the mind is busy fearing tomorrow? A grandchild laughing, rain tapping gently against glass, warm tea between your hands, sunlight across the floor, a quiet conversation, bird song at dawn, a moment of stillness. Life continues offering small miracles, but the fearful mind cannot see them because it is busy rehearsing endings. This does not mean practical preparation is wrong. Wisdom includes realism. Health planning matters. Conversations matter. Acceptance matters. But obsessive mental rehearsal is not preparation. It is suffering, and suffering repeated becomes conditioning. The mind learns fear through repetition. Then comes identity fear. This is subtler and perhaps deeper. The fear is not merely physical ending. It is the fear that I, as I understand myself, may not continue in familiar form. The roles, the memories, the preferences, the story, the self-image, the accumulated psychological identity. Buddhist wisdom examines this with remarkable depth. Much suffering comes from treating the self-story as fixed, solid, permanent. But look carefully. Are you the same person you were at 10, at 20, at 40, at 60? Your body changed. Thoughts changed. Relationships changed. Beliefs changed. Desires changed. Roles changed. Even memories changed. And yet some continuity of awareness remained. So what exactly is the fixed self the mind clings to? This question is not abstract philosophy. It is emotional liberation, because fear intensifies when the mind clings to rigid identity. When identity becomes looser, fear softens. Another hidden fear is unfinished life. People fear endings partly because they feel incomplete, unspoken apologies, unexpressed love, abandoned dreams, lingering resentment, unresolved guilt. This creates emotional turbulence, not because endings are inherently horrifying, but because inner business feels unfinished. This is why Buddhist wisdom repeatedly emphasizes conscious living now, because postponement feeds fear. Say what matters, release what poisons, appreciate what is here. Practice presence, train compassion. Do not endlessly defer life until later. Later is a story, not a guarantee. The more honestly one lives, the less psychologically terrifying endings often become. Then comes perhaps the most painful fear: separation. The fear of losing loved ones or being lost to them. This pain is deeply human. Love creates vulnerability. Attachment creates fear. But Buddhist wisdom distinguishes love from possession. To love is beautiful. To demand permanence from love creates suffering. Nothing meaningful is protected by denial. Everything meaningful is honored by presence. Love now. Appreciate now. Speak kindness now, because fear cannot preserve connection, only presence can deepen it. And perhaps the most dangerous illusion is believing fear somehow keeps you safe. People often unconsciously believe that if they worry enough, mentally prepare enough, imagine enough worst-case scenarios, they will somehow reduce pain. But does fear actually protect peace, or does it steal it? The fearful mind says, stay alert, stay anxious, stay mentally prepared. But many years pass this way, and life becomes narrower, smaller, tenser, less joyful, less alive. Protection becomes imprisonment. A wise elder once said, "I spent years fearing the bridge before I reached it. When I finally arrived, it was smaller than my imagination." How often does the mind do exactly this? Build towering horrors from uncertainty, and perhaps the final freedom comes in understanding that peace does not require certainty. This may be one of the most important truths of all. Because certainty is rarely available. Health changes, circumstances change, relationships change. Time changes, the future remains unwritten. If peace depends on certainty, peace remains impossible. But if peace depends on presence, peace becomes available now, right here, in uncertainty. This changes everything. The uncontrolled mind demands guarantees. The trained mind learns trust in direct experience. This breath is here. This awareness is here. This moment is alive. And that is enough. Buddhist wisdom does not promise immunity from endings. It offers freedom from being mentally destroyed by them long before they arrive. Old age is not meant to become a waiting room of fear. It can become a season of extraordinary clarity, a season where illusions soften, attachments loosen, presence deepens, gratitude expands, fear loses authority, and the mind, once wild and tyrannical, becomes quieter than it has ever been. Because the final battle was never truly against endings. It was against the frightened mind's stories about them. Master that mind, and even the deepest uncertainty loses its power over your peace. And so here we are, after walking through fear, regret, loneliness, attachment, restlessness, aging, and the final battle with endings. One truth should now be clearer than ever. The greatest struggle in old age is not with time. It is not with wrinkles. It is not with slower steps. It is not even with uncertainty. It is with the mind that turns all of these things into suffering. Buddhist wisdom has never promised a life without pain. That was never the teaching. Pain belongs to life. Bodies age, people leave, memories fade, circumstances change. The world keeps moving. Nothing stays exactly as it is, but suffering becomes far heavier when the mind resists every change, clings to every memory, fears every uncertainty, and believes every frightening story it creates. That is the prison. And the beautiful truth is this: prisons built by the mind can also be unlocked by the mind. You may be older, but awareness has not grown old. You may walk slower, but wisdom can still grow deeper. You may have lost things, but peace is not one of the things life automatically takes, not unless you hand it away. Think about that. Some people spend their final years in constant internal war, replaying the past, fearing the future, feeling forgotten, fighting reality, waiting for certainty that never comes, and slowly, without realizing it, they stop truly living long before life actually ends. Do not let that become your story, because even now, especially now, peace is possible. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your relationship with the mind can change. The thought comes, you observe it. The fear comes, you breathe through it. The regret returns, you no longer build a home for it. Loneliness appears, you meet yourself with compassion. The future feels uncertain, you return to this moment again and again and again. This is not weakness, this is mastery. This is the quiet strength Buddhist wisdom points toward, not domination through force, but freedom through understanding. Remember this deeply. A storm does not ask the mountain for permission to arrive, but the mountain remains. Thoughts will come, fear will come, sadness will come, memories will come, but you do not have to become every storm that passes through your mind. You can remain the mountain, and perhaps that is the real meaning of growing old with wisdom. Not becoming untouched by life, but becoming unshaken by the mind's endless attempts to turn life into suffering. If this message spoke to your heart, write peace in the comments, so I know you stayed until the end. And tell me something honest. What is the one thought you are finally ready to let go of? Because sometimes the first moment of healing begins the moment we name the burden we no longer wish to carry. If this video brought you calm, stay with this channel. There is more timeless Buddhist wisdom waiting for you. Until next time, breathe gently, release what you cannot hold forever, and protect your inner peace like the treasure it truly is.